Rivers, the legend, truly. Such a gifted, unbelievably sweet and wonderful person. And, how I met Sam was I put a couple iterations of an idea of a band I was, trying to make happen in Jacksonville, Florida. I had this idea and vision for this particular type of, style and sound.
Fred Durst did not want sympathy, he wanted understanding, and that distinction mattered deeply to him. In private conversations, Fred Durst admitted that the tragedy forced him to confront fears he had buried for years. Fame once felt like freedom, but now it carried consequences that echoed far beyond the stage. Limp Bizkit was born from raw expression, but Fred Durst began to realize that raw power also demands awareness. This emotional shift did not weaken him, it sharpened him. Fred Durst started approaching music with intention, allowing space for emotion instead of masking it behind aggression. Fans noticed that Fred Durst spoke more openly about mental health responsibility, and the unseen weight artists carried. Limp Bizkit concerts became moments of collective release rather than reckless escape. Fred Durst used eye contact, pauses, and tone to connect on a deeper level, reminding audiences that energy is shared and choices matter. This was not a lecture, it was a transformation happening in real time. Fred Durst understood that tragedy leaves lessons whether we ask for them or not. Limp Bizkit evolved not by abandoning its roots but by honoring them with maturity. Industry peers reached out, privately acknowledging the strength it took for Fred Durst to continue without pretending everything was fine. He no longer chased headlines or controversy because the loudest moment of his life had already passed and it was not one he wanted repeated. Fred Durst began focusing on mentorship, guiding younger artists about responsibility, crowd awareness, and emotional balance. Limp Bizkit had once been criticized for chaos, but now, Fred Durst was quietly shaping a safer, more conscious future. In interviews, Fred Durst spoke about grief as something that does not disappear but changes shape over time. He described moments when music felt impossible and others when it felt like the only way to breathe. Limp Bizkit sessions became therapeutic spaces where pain could transform into sound without explanation. Fred Durst did not sanitize the experience, he allowed it to exist. Honestly, that honesty resonated deeply with fans who had followed him for decades and new listeners discovering a different side of the iconic frontman. The tragedy also changed how Fred Durst viewed success. Awards, streams, and numbers felt small compared to the human cost attached to moments of excess. Limp Bizkit continued touring, but every show carried a quiet promise to honor life rather than exploit energy. Fred Durst no longer rushed onto stages. He paused, breathed, and grounded himself before every performance. This ritual became a symbol of respect for the past and commitment to the future. Over time, Fred Durst found peace, not because the pain vanished, but because he learned to carry it without letting it consume him. Limp Bizkit survived yet another storm, not by denying it, but by facing it head-on. Fred Durst emerged emotionally scarred, but stronger, wiser, and more aware than ever before. His voice still commanded crowds, but now it carried empathy alongside power. This evolution did not erase the past, but it ensured it would not be repeated. Today, Fred Durst stands as a reminder that even the most fearless performers are shaped by moments they never expected. Limp Bizkit remains influential, not just for its sound, but for its survival through adversity. Fred Durst transformed tragedy into responsibility, pain into growth, and chaos into consciousness. The music continues, but the message is clearer than ever: energy matters, lives matter, and every moment carries weight. Fred Durst did not break, he evolved, and that evolution is the most powerful statement of all. Never cried on stage until the night Limp Bizkit's music turned into silence, and the man who built his legacy on rage was forced to face a tragedy that changed him forever. And what happened next is something fans were never meant to see. Fred Durst stood in silence long after the stage. Lights went dark, and the roaring crowd faded into memory, and for the first time in years, the man known for chaos, rage, and raw energy felt something heavier than anger, something that could not be screamed away. Fred Durst was not wearing the red cap that night, and for those who know Limp Bizkit, that detail alone said everything. Fred Durst had built his career on rebellion, on noise, on refusing to bend, but tragedy, as a way of breaking even the loudest voices, in this moment changed him forever. Limp Bizkit had survived controversy, hate, and decades of criticism, but nothing prepared Fred Durst for the emotional weight that now sat on his chest, refusing to move. This was not about fame or music anymore. This was about loss, responsibility, and the quiet pain that follows when the world expects you to stay strong while your heart is. Reckon Fred Durst had always been the shield for Limp Bizkit, the face that absorbed the backlash while the band created history behind him. From packed arenas to explosive festival sets, Fred Durst thrived on intensity. But behind the scenes, this tragedy forced him to look inward in a way he never had before. People saw the headlines, but they did not see the sleepless nights, the replaying memories, or the crushing thought that something irreversible had happened under the shadow of the music he loved. Fred Durst is a performer, but he is also human, and in moments like this, even legends feel small. Limp Bizkit fans noticed the change immediately. The quieter interviews, the heavier pauses, the way Fred Durst spoke with more reflection than fire. As the news spread, reactions poured in from across the rock and metal world, but Fred Durst remained mostly silent, choosing reflection over reaction. Those close to Limp Bizkit revealed that Fred Durst took the tragedy personally, questioning moments, decisions, and paths that could never be rewritten. He revisited old memories of early Limp Bizkit days, when everything felt unstoppable and careless joy ruled the road. Back then, Fred Durst believed music could conquer anything, but tragedy taught him that some wounds do not heal with sound. Limp Bizkit had always been about pushing limits, but now those limits felt painfully real. Fred Durst eventually addressed the moment with visible emotion, his voice slower, his eyes heavier, carrying a weight that words struggled to contain. He spoke about responsibility, about the connection between artists and fans, and about how quickly celebration can turn into sorrow. This was not the aggressive frontman fans were used to seeing. This was Fred Durst, stripped of armor, facing reality head-on. Limp Bizkit did not cancel music or disappear, but the tone had shifted permanently. Every performance after carried an unspoken dedication to those affected, and Fred Durst made sure that energy was felt even without saying it out loud. Behind closed doors, Fred Durst leaned on bandmates who had walked decades with him through success, failure, and survival. Limp Bizkit was no longer just a band, it was a family processing grief. Together, Fred Durst spent long hours replaying events, trying to understand how a moment meant for unity could result in devastation. He questioned fame, power, and the influence musicians hold over massive crowds. This was not about blame, but about accountability and growth. Fred Durst knew the world would move on quickly, but he also knew that he never would fully forget. As weeks passed, Fred Durst slowly returned to the public eye, but fans could feel the shift. His lyrics hit deeper, his presence calmer, yet more intense, in a different way. Limp Bizkit shows became more than nostalgia, they became emotional releases. Fred Durst carried the tragedy with him like a scar, invisible but permanent. The music still hit hard, but now it carried layers of meaning, pain, and remembrance. Fred Durst was no longer just performing, he was processing, healing, and honoring something that could never be undone. The tragedy reshaped how Fred Durst viewed his legacy. He stopped chasing noise and started focusing on impact. Limp Bizkit was built on chaos, but Fred Durst learned that growth sometimes comes from silence. Every step forward was deliberate, every word chosen carefully. This was the beginning of a new chapter not defined by controversy but by reflection, resilience, and responsibility. Fred Durst had not lost his fire, but it now burned with purpose rather than destruction.